Hi everyone and welcome to my video lesson for Macbeth. In this video lesson I am aiming to try to tell you everything that you need to know, all of the main points for language, form, structure, character, themes and symbols, everything you need to know for your IGCSE. Now this video lesson is aimed primarily at those who are studying IGCSE English literature with Edexcel. But if you're studying any other exam board, like it's the same characters, it's the same themes, etc. So you can just skip over the opening bit of this video lesson where I'm going to talk about the assessment objectives and the past papers for Edexcel and just head straight into the analysis part. If you like this video lesson, you can find more like this on my website, tautly.co.uk. I've got more free lessons on there, but I do also offer one-to-one tutoring, group classes, masterclasses, including one for First Language English coming up in March 2025. Link is in the description. 18 live lessons with me and I'll mark your work every week, guys. I'm going to be busy. I've also got on my website self-paced courses that you can do and teaching resources too if you are a teacher. Firstly then, over to the assessment objectives for Edexcel. So for Edexcel, you will do Macbeth on your paper 2, it's your literary heritage text. And you'll be tested on 3 assessment objectives. So you'll be tested on AO1, which is how well do you know the text? Do you know the plot? Do you know the characters? Do you know the themes? Can you write in a critical style? So can you write academically and formally? And can you have an informed personal engagement, or in other words, have an argument, have an opinion, have your own thoughts about the play and actually back this argument up with your great knowledge? AO2 is analysis of language, form and structure. So analysing the language of the play, analysing the fact that it is a play performed in the theatre and analysing the overall structure and organisation of the text. And AO4 finally is that you need to link all of your analysis to context. So linking back to historical context is very, very important. Students often forget this one. Very important, do not forget your AO4. Let's have a look at some past paper questions for Edexcel. Generally, you do get a character question and a theme question. Not always, but generally. So some example past papers. Captain, the merciless MacDonald, worthy to be a rebel. Discuss the theme of betrayal in Macbeth. Or discuss the presentation of one character you sympathise with and why. A gift of a question here, right? A gift, because you can write about whoever you feel the most confident to write about. You could sympathise with Macbeth because he undergoes a tragic fall, or Lady Macbeth because she's a woman in a time when ambition is always going to be punished. You could sympathise with Banquo, Macbeth's loyal friend, who ends up being murdered by his best friend. You could sympathise with King Duncan, the loyal golden king who Macbeth murdered. So whoever you feel most confident about writing about. Might be kind of hard to do the witches. Some more past paper questions. In what ways does Macduff contribute to Macbeth's downfall in the play? Or Shakespeare makes great use of symbols such as weather and blood. Explore the significance of symbols in Macbeth. Throughout the play there is a battle between good and evil. Explore the theme of good versus evil in Macbeth. I've seen some very, very good essays for that past paper question. And how does Shakespeare present the character of Macbeth in the play? Notice as well that one question is usually a bit easier and one a bit harder. So the Macbeth question, kind of easy. Battle between good and evil, bit harder, a bit more challenging. Discuss the presentation of one character you think changes the most in the play. And explore the theme of power in Macbeth. And finally, in what ways the witch is important in Macbeth, and explore the theme of ambition in the play. Let's get stuck in with some analysis then. So we're beginning off with AO4 context. These are the contextual points that we're going to discuss. So we'll discuss King James I, the Great Chain of Being, the Divine Rights of Kings, the Gunpowder Plot, women and patriarchal society, and finally witches and the supernatural. So King James I. He was previously known as King James VI of Scotland. He had recently ascended to the English throne. Interestingly, he was the first king that united both Scotland and England. Now, King James I was very interested in the supernatural and in witches. He believed that they were real, and in fact he even wrote a book about the witches called Of Demonology. So don't forget that Shakespeare was a famous writer in his own era, and the monarchy, the kings and queens, King James and King Elizabeth and Queen Elizabeth would have actually been sitting in the audience of the Globe and watching his plays. So he is directly addressing King James I's interests of kingship and witchcraft. He had a deep interest in the supernatural, as we've said, but also don't forget he'd recently survived the Gunpowder Plot to kill him. So Guy Fawkes and his merry men They plotted to blow up the Houses of Parliament and therefore kill the king and all of the politicians. So what happens in Macbeth? Macbeth kills the king. So therefore the whole play is like this warning of, if you kill the king, look at all of these bad things that will happen to you. Essentially a warning against regicide, against killing the king. So because of this, because of people trying to kill him reasonably, King James was anxious about threats to his power from assassins and also from witchcrafts. The play is also complimentary towards Banquo, who was said to be King James I's real ancestor. So you know when it's talking about with Banquo, you shall get kings though thou be none. Your future sons will be kings, but you yourself won't be. Well, King James I is one of Banquo's descendants that will become kings. So that is Shakespeare directly sucking up to King James I. Now, in the Jacobean times, people believed that there was a very, very strict hierarchy called the Great Chain of Being. You can see it right here. So at the Great Chain of Being, which is basically a hierarchy, right? You've got God, followed by angels, followed by demons. You'd have the king right here, man, animals, plants and minerals. So when Macbeth kills King James, he is upsetting the Great Chain of Being, this natural order and hierarchy. But not only that, because people believed that kings had the divine right? We call it the divine right, as in they had been selected by God to be king. So when Macbeth kills King James, he's directly going against what God wanted. Now, to challenge your position, and particularly to challenge the king, is an affront, an offence to God, and it's causing chaos. So when Macbeth does this, he disrupts the Great Chain of Being, he goes against the divine right of kings, and he disrupts the natural order, he breaks the natural order. And so we see that kind of reference the whole way throughout the play whenever we've got references to the natural order being disturbed, of the witches unleashing the winds, going against the natural order and so on. And by the end of the play, when Macbeth is beheaded and taken down from the throne, the natural order is restored. On to women and patriarchy. So during the Jacobean era, society was patriarchal, which means led by men. Actually, our society is still quite patriarchal. And women were said to be below men in the Great Chain of Being. Women's roles within that time were very clearly defined. Women were supposed to be mothers, carers, nurturers. They were supposed to marry, have children, and be subservient. Yes, husband, you know best, darling, right? And women who did not do this, who decided, I've got my own thoughts and opinions, were actually labelled as witches, ostracised from society, and even sometimes killed for apparently being a witch. Being a witch basically means a woman with opinions. But isn't that just Lady Macbeth in a nutshell, right? So Lady Macbeth, she is defying these patriarchal values, and as such Shakespeare characterises her as being almost like another witch. Now, we've touched on witches and the supernatural already, but don't forget that in the Jacobean era there was a real superstition and belief and anxiety in witchcraft. In both the lower classes and also in royalty, with King James writing the book of demonology. In fact, King James I even asked Parliament to pass an anti-witchcraft law. Ooh, that'll stop them. Now there's a law. No more witches. And he actually also killed several witches in the North Berwick witch trials. On now to Shakespeare's intentions. So your teacher probably often says to you guys, what are the writer's intentions, right? What's the big message here? So what I'm aiming to do here is to give you guys some thesis statements, some argument statements that you could put in most introductions. These can also work really well in your conclusion, so that you're not just kind of repeating what you've said, but you're going a bit deeper in your conclusion. And in fact, these thesis statements can also link quite nicely to your analysis too. So if you've got a nice little bit of analysis, perhaps one of these sentences might be useful to you. Macbeth serves as a warning against vaulting ambition, urging respect for the natural order. So remember, Macbeth talks about his vaulting ambition, his ambition that jumps too high and overleaps itself. So don't get too ambitious, respect the natural order. The pursuit of power will lead to isolation, paranoia and ruin. Guilt and conscience are inescapable, and eventually all sins must be paid for, whether in life or the afterlife. So the Macbeths get what they want, but they both go crazy and they both die. So you will have to pay for the things that you do wrong. Macbeth's choices are his own, therefore arguing for human responsibility for one's own actions. Throughout the play, and I read many essays trying to blame everyone but Macbeth for his own actions, right? So we mainly trying to blame the women, let's be real. So we try to say like, oh, Macbeth was, catalysed by the witches, it's their fault, they started him off, or Lady Macbeth, she pressured him into the first murder of King Duncan. But ultimately no one decided to murder anyone but Macbeth. So he has to take responsibility for what he did. Actions against moral and social laws like regicide, killing the king, will lead to temporary chaos and unhappiness, but ultimately order will be restored. So we can disrupt the natural order, we can disrupt the great chain of being, but God's will always find its way back. Any disruption will be temporary and God will always win in the end. Now let's have a think about the main characters in Macbeth and what they symbolise. What could you say about them if you had given them as a character to analyse for your exam? Starting off, of course, with our tragic hero, Macbeth. So he represents bravery, ambition, betrayal and guilt. His hamartia, which means his fatal flaw, is his vaulting ambition, his ambition that jumps too high. The witches' prophecies transform him from a loyal warrior into a morally weakened and psychotic tyrant. And indeed we see this transformation, this fall in status, as he begins the play being called Brave Macbeth and ends the play as the Dead Butcher. It's interesting though, isn't it, because he starts the play also as a soldier that's got high respect because he's really great at fighting and killing people. For example, we learn that he killed someone by unseaming him from the nave to the chop, cut him from the belly button to his cheeks. So even at the start of the play he's incredibly violent and brutal and bloody. But that's okay because the king wants him to kill those people. But I suppose in that sense he's not going against the great chain of being. By the end of the play, he's a tyrant, he's a butcher. A butcher, someone that just slashes and cuts and kills. Arguably not really changed there, it's just that he's tried to kill the wrong person. Lady Macbeth, one of my favourite characters to write essays about. I studied Macbeth for my literature A-level and my final A-level question was on Lady Macbeth. I was so happy. Anyway, so Lady Macbeth, she represents ambition, cunning, manipulation and eventually guilt. She's a rebel in many ways. She challenges how women are supposed to be, that we should be submissive to our husbands and the men in our lives. She directly tells Macbeth what to do. And so she's disrupting this great chain of being and the divine right of kings. She asks to be unsexed, which means to be stripped of her femininity. It's interesting actually because that whole unsex me here speech is basically her saying, get rid of anything that is feminine, caring, motherly about me, make me cold, make me like a witch so that I can fulfill what I need to do. I mean, we can argue a little bit in Lady Macbeth's favour because the only way that a woman can achieve any sort of power or influence is via their husband. And you do have to be brutal in many ways to ascend this hierarchy as a woman. So can we feel any empathy for her with that? But over the course of the play, she is transformed. So although she begins ambitious and cunning, she ends guilty and pitiful. She becomes mad, she becomes soft, she becomes a victim of her own actions when she is sleepwalking, or as we call it, somnambulism, sleepwalking, and saying out, damned spot, imagining she's still got blood on her hands. Thinking about King Duncan when she says, who would have thought the old man to have had so much blood in him, clearly haunted by those actions. She also feels very guilty, especially about Macduff's wife and children who were killed, when she says, the Thane of Fife had a wife, where is she now? And begins talking in this strange nursery rhyme, childlike style of language, showing perhaps this regression to a childlike stance. In terms of structure too, we also see that she starts the play speaking in iambic pentameter, associated with high status characters, but in this section when she's sleepwalking, she's speaking in prose, associated with low status characters. So like Macbeth, she also starts high and has a fall in status. Up next, King Duncan. So King Duncan symbolises nobility, dignity and trust. He's the king that we should have, the king that God chose, the king that Macbeth will never be. So we see that Shakespeare is complimenting royalty and complimenting King Duncan. He is described as a most sainted king. He is respecting and trusting to Macbeth even though he shouldn't be. He calls Macbeth valiant and worthy. But he's betrayed by Macbeth because he fails to recognise that appearances can be deceiving. He doesn't realise there's daggers in men's smiles, that Macbeth is looking like the innocent flower but he's the serpent under it. And so when Macbeth turns out to be foul and not fair, Duncan's flaw is that he was too trusting and this leads to his own death. When Duncan dies, that is the point in the plot where the natural order is completely disrupted, and it's only restored again once the rightful heir to the throne is put in place and Macbeth is killed. Banquo. Banquo symbolises nobility, loyalty and trust. Of course, Shakespeare's got to be complimentary towards Banquo as King James I's direct ancestor. So Banquo is very, very loyal, and he's also sensible, right? He rejects the prophecies. When the witches tell Macbeth, "Thou shalt be king hereafter," Macbeth is immediately like, "Ooh, great, nice plan," and he immediately starts hatching a plot. Remember, one of his first lines as soon as he gets a chance to speak by himself is, "Stars, hide my fires, let not light see my black and deep desires." So he's immediately going to murder. Whereas Banquo, he's a little bit more sceptical, he's more wise. And so he foils Macbeth. He's a foil character, meaning he's a contrast to him. Rather than saying, "Stars, hide my fires," Banquo instead says, "The instruments of darkness tell us truths." So he recognises that the witches are evil. There's something not to be trusted. And remember that Banquo, he receives a very exciting prophecy too. So Macbeth hears that he's going to be king, but Banquo hears that his sons will be kings, and yet Banquo doesn't take any steps to accomplish that. Like, Macbeth decides to intervene in this natural order, rather than just thinking, as he says earlier on, "If chance may have me king, why chance may crown me so. If this happens to come my way, great. If it doesn't, no problem." Macbeth actually puts in the effort to make that prophecy come true, whereas Banquo doesn't do that. And both men have had equally exciting prophecies. So Banquo here is kind of foiling Macbeth of, this is what a reasonable and normal and sane person would do. By contrast, Macbeth, with all of his hallucinations, "Is this a dagger I see before me?" Takes steps to actually bring these evil prophecies to life. And not forgetting too that Banquo, because of this prophecy, becomes that threat to Macbeth. Macbeth knows he will be king, but his seat is not safe, because Banquo's sons will be kings. Macbeth even says, "To be thus is nothing but to be safely thus." He wants to be safely king, but he can never be that because Banquo's sons will be kings. And this is what leads Macbeth to later on murder Banquo. Got the lovely characters of the witches now. Now they symbolise the supernatural, evil and equivocation. Well, what does equivocation mean? So it means that they never give the full answer. They equivocate. So they tell him just enough, but not the entire full truth. For example, when they say to Macbeth, "None of woman born shall harm Macbeth," they're giving him technically the truth, but not the full truth. Because Macbeth thinks that means, well, everyone is born of woman, therefore no one can hurt me. But Macduff was, from his mother's womb, untimely ripped. He was born by C-section. So their equivocation is what pushes Macbeth to kill the king, and then later pushes him towards his tragic ending of his own death. The witches, they are also the other, which means that they are on the outside, they are alienated. They exist literally on the outskirts of society, because we know that the only setting we ever see them in is the heath. They're also very interesting because they blur the boundaries between male and female, between the present and the future. When Banquo first sees them, he says, "You should be women, but your beards forbid me to interpret that you are so." So these witches have got beards. So again, this blurring of boundaries. Now, in terms of gender roles, that's kind of a sign that Shakespeare is giving us that these witches are of the devil, that they are evil, that they are not to be trusted, that they are upsetting the natural order and that great chain of being. But of course, Macbeth does not heed that warning and just goes, "Great, witches with beards, what shall I do next?" And in every which way they are unnatural. Banquo even says that they look not like the inhabitants of the earth, so they don't even look human, and they play with the weather, which is another symbol of them disrupting the natural order. Our next characters are the Macduffs, so both Macduff and Lady Macduff, and they symbolise family, loyalty and vengeance. So Macduff also acts as this contrast to the Macbeths, right? Much like Banquo does. The Macduffs as a family are loyal, they're loving, they've got children too, which the Macbeths don't have. And Macduff is a noble and loyal warrior the whole way through the play. He doesn't turn traitor like Macbeth does. He's noble from the start to the end. It's also very interesting to contrast Macduff to Macbeth in terms of their manhood, their masculinity. Macduff's manliness is secure. His manliness involves both fighting and feeling. Now remember, when Lady Macbeth wants to manipulate Macbeth into killing Duncan, she says to him, "When you durst do it, then you were a man. When you do it, then you were a real man." So she's playing on his insecurity of his masculinity to manipulate him. But Macduff sees that his masculinity is not just about being cruel and violent, but also about having empathy and feeling. When Macduff learns that his whole family has been killed, his wife, his children and all of his servants, he says that he will dispute it like a man, but that he must also feel it as a man. So he will fight, but he will feel. Perhaps one of Macbeth's great flaws is that he doesn't allow himself to feel, he only allows himself to fight. And Lady Macduff's own death haunts Lady Macbeth. She says, the Thane of Fife, Macduff, had a wife, where is she now? Moving on now to themes, and for themes I'm just going to give you a brief overview of a thesis statement that you could say about each one. And that's just because there's a lot of crossover with what we've already spoken about. I don't want the video to become too long or too repetitive. So here are our 8 main themes. So guilt. Guilt represents the consequences of immoral actions. It haunts characters like Macbeth and Lady Macbeth. Kingship. So within the kingship of Macbeth, we've got the contrast of the rightful rule of Duncan with Macbeth's tyranny and unlawful reign. Ambition. So ambition is Macbeth's hamartia, his fatal flaw. It's the driving force of Macbeth's downfall, that he is too ambitious. So by that, Shakespeare offers the message that unchecked, uncontrolled ambition will breed destruction. Gender. Shakespeare challenges traditional gender roles, but we're not encouraged to think of it as a good thing. It is a sign of evil. So Lady Macbeth manipulates Macbeth by attacking his masculinity. She encourages the murder she psychs herself up for the murder by stripping herself of her own femininity. The witches are blurring the gender boundaries. And one of the reasons why Macbeth ultimately fails is because he's unable to feel it as a man, and he just acts as a butcher. Rather than someone that stops and thinks about his actions and their consequences. We've got the theme of appearance and reality too. Within the play, deception dominates and things are not what they seem. So we've got those great quotes like, "There's daggers in man's smiles, look like the innocent flower, but be the serpent under it." And of course, fair is foul and foul is fair. Things that seem beautiful are foul and things that seem foul are actually fair. We cannot trust what we see. The supernatural. So the witches and visions, hallucinations influence Macbeth's fate and cause his moral decline. In some ways, we can argue. I would argue that just one aspect of Macbeth still chooses his own actions as a fully grown man. The theme of loyalty and betrayal can best be seen in how Macbeth betrays Duncan. He also betrays his good friend Banquo. And this is a symbol of how the natural order has been disrupted too. And finally, we see the theme of good versus evil, with this struggle for morality. The good characters such as Macduff, Malcolm, Banquo, King Duncan, and the corrupted characters such as Macbeth and Lady Macbeth. Now moving on to form and structure, and this is a feature that I see more so in grade 8 and 9 student work, so it is a very high level thing to talk about. Most students will just ramble on about language, maybe a little bit of symbolism, but the higher level students will be able to analyse form and structure. So the play has a circular structure, meaning it starts and ends in the same way. So the play starts and ends on a battlefield, with Macbeth showing great courage and great violence at both the beginning and the end. But by the end, he has got no loyalty, no comrades, and dies alone. And this is part of his tragedy, this great fall. So we start and end in a similar way, but within that, Macbeth has lost all of his status and respect. This could be to show that the natural order is broken within the play, but then restored. So, coming whole, natural order restored. At the end, Malcolm is crowned and the great chain of being is restored. Macbeth is beheaded and time is free. So this shows that Scotland has now been liberated from Macbeth's oppressive rule. We also see that Macbeth undergoes a tragic fall. So this is a feature of the genre of tragedy. So Aristotle stated that in tragedies you will have a tragic hero who begins the play in a position of power, nobility, prosperity, high status, and will end in a state of misfortune or downfall. Well, more of a downfall do you need than your head being cut off, really. And because of this trajectory of starting high and ending low, we get this emotional impact of tragedy. And so we see that Macbeth begins as brave Macbeth and ends as a dead butcher and a tyrant. Those would be really great quotes for proving that tragic fall as part of the structure of the play. Some more features of tragedy that I might encourage you guys to have a think about. So firstly, we've got his hamartia, as discussed before, his fatal flaw, which is his vaulting ambition. We also see that Macbeth suffers from hubris, which means excessive pride and arrogance. And when he believes the line, "None born of woman shall harm Macbeth," he doesn't think critically about the witch's prophecies. He's just like, yeah, I'm great. That prophecy sounds right. No one born of a woman can possibly hurt me. And that partially leads to his downfall too. We've also got the peripeteia, which means a turning point. In other words, a point of no return. When you've gone too far, that you kind of have to carry on. And so a key quote for that would be when Macbeth says, "I am in blood stepped in so far that should I wade no more, returning were as tedious as go over." This wonderful metaphor and imagery of Macbeth stood in a sea of blood. Too far. He could only go through. There's no point going back now, he's in too deep. We've got the anagnosis, which means a crucial discovery. In Macbeth, this would be when he realises that actually he's not invincible. For example, when Macduff says to him, "Macduff was from his mother's womb untimely ripped," and then Macbeth realises his hubris and that he's about to die. And by the end of the play, we should as an audience experience some catharsis, which means this cleansing of anxiety, this evoking of pity and fear. In other words, like sometimes I like to explain it as, in the tragedy, the point where you cry and then you feel better afterwards because you've had a cry. Call it emotional purging. So by the end of the play, when Macbeth is killed and the natural order is restored, we as an audience should experience some catharsis. Another key thing to note as a feature of form, the fact that it is a play, is Shakespeare's use of iambic pentameter and blank verse. So iambic pentameter is when you've got lines of 10 syllables with one unstressed syllable followed by a stressed syllable, giving you a da-dum, 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 right? "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate." Right, okay, you get the idea. So this iambic pentameter is associated with characters of high status. It also sounds like a heartbeat. Could we argue it's like the natural order, the heartbeat of Scotland that gradually breaks down? And blank verse just basically means writing in like poetic form but without rhyme. So it looks like poetry but it's not rhyming. And that's created by the fact that it is an iambic pentameter, so obviously after every 10 syllables you need to start a new line. So iambic pentameter is associated with characters of high power, high status and high authority. Well, what can you say about this? Macbeth and Lady Macbeth both begin the play speaking using iambic pentameter, but this breaks down for both of them. So when Lady Macbeth has her breakdown and she's sleepwalking, she stops using blank verse, she stops using iambic pentameter, and she starts speaking in prose. Macbeth doesn't ever speak completely in prose. Off the top of my head, I think he might though when he's discussing with the murderers. Someone comment, I think he does. Check that part for me. But in his final soliloquy, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day. The meter becomes incredibly irregular and fragmented and broken. So the fact that his iambic pentameter becomes fragmented, you could say, symbolises or mirrors his broken state of mind or his broken loss of status. As he now realises that death is upon him, his wife has died. So as we've said then, prose is used by low status characters. It's just normal speech without a rhythm, without a beat, and continuous, so we don't start a new line. Shakespeare uses it to show that lack of power and authority. So the characters that speak using prose would be the drunk porter, Lady Macbeth's attendants, the murderers, and Lady Macbeth herself during those sleepwalking scenes. It can represent a loss of formality or control. The use of soliloquies too is very notable in Macbeth. So a soliloquy is a speech that you give to yourself but that the audience overhear. So this allows the audience to understand the character's inner thoughts and conflict. It's also quite fun because it allows us to see Macbeth like plotting. So he meets the witches, and then once he thinks Banquo can't hear and Banquo can't hear, he's just like, "Mahaha, okay, right. Stars hide your fires, let not light see my black and deep desires." So we see that Macbeth's inner thoughts immediately go to murder. So notable soliloquies that you could analyse would be, "Is this a dagger I see before me?" So this is showing Macbeth's gradual breakdown of his state of mind and his hallucinations. When Macbeth decides to kill Banquo, his speech, "To be thus is nothing but to be safely thus. There's no point in being king unless I'm safely king. So let me just murder my best friend and his son." Just cute things like that, right, Macbeth? And as I've said, one of my favourite ever Shakespearean soliloquies The final soliloquy Macbeth gives on the battlefield after he's learned that Lady Macbeth has died, and therefore what is the point of life? He has like an existential crisis where he says tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day. And again, just to remind you guys, using broken iambic pentameter, the meter becomes fractured, representing Macbeth's fragmented state of mind and loss of status. Another feature of form would be dramatic irony. So dramatic irony is when the audience knows something that the characters on the stage do not know. So this heightens tension and suspense as we wait for the other characters to catch up with what we already know. For example, when King Duncan arrives at Macbeth's castle, we already know that Macbeth and Lady Macbeth have got big plans for him. Murderous plans for him. But King Duncan obviously doesn't know that. And so he says, oh, this castle hath a pleasant seat. Like, oh, what a beautiful place it is here. But we know that he's going to think that this castle is anything but beautiful in his final moments when he's stabbed to death in his sleep. Thanks, Macbeth, for that. When the characters find King Duncan's body, Lady Macbeth very dramatically swoons. She faints, right? But the audience know that this is all an act, so we can see her manipulation. And then the final example would be Banquo's ghost. So when Macbeth has killed Banquo and he hallucinates and sees Banquo's ghost at the banquet table, only Macbeth and the audience can see that. So while he's like, ah, never shake thy gory locks at me, and all of the other people there are like, you're right, pal. We know that it's because it's this like manifestation of his guilty mind. Now we're going to analyse some motifs that we see within Macbeth. A motif, by the way, is just a repeated symbol that we often see throughout the play. So the motifs that we will analyse will be blood, hands, birds, storms, light and dark, and infertility, meaning being unable to have children. If you want this for your notes, you can just screenshot here. Here's the too long didn't read of what all of these motifs mean. So blood. Blood represents guilt, violence, and the permanence of Macbeth's crimes. You cannot wash it away, it will stay with you forever. So Macbeth says, will all of great Neptune's oceans wash this blood clean from my hand? Showing at the start of the play he understands the great consequence of killing Duncan, that he will never truly be able to get clean from that moment. Interestingly, and not quoted on here, Lady Macbeth in this moment says to him, oh, a little water clears us of this deed. So she thinks, just wash your hands and it's all fine. But Macbeth knows that this is going to be a more permanent state for him. Once you've killed someone, once you've killed the king, you can never go back from that. And it's interesting to see that Lady Macbeth, although at the start of the play she says, a little water clears us of this deed, by the end actually has got a very similar outlook to Macbeth. She says, here's the smell of blood still. All the perfumes of Arabia will not sweeten this little hand. So she gradually comes to realise that also the permanence of her actions. She likewise says, out, out, damned spot, out I say, as she hallucinates and sees blood on her hands. Macbeth also says blood will have blood. This idea of once you start to kill, you can't stop. I mean, you have to cover up that crime. So blood will have blood. And Lady Macbeth says, make thick my blood, stop up the access and passage to remorse, when she wants to kill King Duncan. So this idea of like, stop the natural process, stop the blood in my body so that I can commit unnatural actions. Hands too. I mean, hands are often like intersecting with blood. So there's some similar quotes here. But hands represent responsibility and the physical manifestation of guilt. So this idea of what you did with your hands stays with you forever. So Lady Macbeth saying, a little water clears us of this deed. Will all great Neptune's oceans wash this blood clean from my hand? Out, damn spot, I say, etc. And then by the end of the play, we've also got Lady Macbeth saying, what's done cannot be undone. Again, contrasting her earlier words, she starts off by saying, what's done is done. Like, it's over, babe, forget it, it's fine. And now she moves from what's done is done to what's done cannot be undone. So that like repetition of the similar words shows that journey of her guilt that absolutely paralyses her and leads to her suicide. Likewise, we have got the motif of birds. So birds represent omens, like a sign, a signal, both good and bad omens, and they also represent the natural order. So for example, Lady Macbeth says, the raven himself is hoarse that croaks the fatal entrance of Duncan. Raven meaning a black bird. So the raven will be hoarse, his voice will be sore when Duncan enters the castle. And during Duncan's murder, we hear that apparently an owl shrieked. So the owls representing the natural order, showing that something has been disrupted here. Throughout the play, we have got the motif of storms. In fact, the play even begins, "When shall we three meet again? In thunder, lightning, or in rain." So beginning in a storm. Storms represent chaos, turmoil, and the disruption of the natural order. And so we also see this in other quotes such as, "So foul and fair a day I have not seen." So this idea that it's absolutely terrible weather, but also fair. So how can a day be both foul and fair? Again, the natural order and what we expect being disrupted. When Duncan is dead, apparently there are lamentings heard in the air, strange screams of death. And we also hear when Macbeth is about to die, he says, "Blow, wind, come rack, at least we'll die with harness on our back." Quite an interesting idea here, like blow wind, like let the storms and the chaos continue. But Macbeth, in some ways, at the end of the play, restores a tiny bit of his honour because he chooses to die like a man. At least we'll die with harness on our back. At least we'll die fighting. So he's going out as a soldier. In some way, kind of restoring his honour in a small way. Although, I mean, does that go to one of his flaws where he thinks that he has to just dispute it like a man but not feel it like a man? The motif of light and dark represents good versus evil, truth versus deception, and also this kind of moral conflict of two contrasting things. So when Macbeth says, "Stars, hide your fires, let not light see my black and deep desires." Stars, bright, light, hide your fires, stars become dark. Don't let the light, don't let the goodness see the black desires in my heart, basically. Lady Macbeth says, "Come thick night and pall thee in the dunnest smoke of hell." So when she's trying to call on spirits to help her commit Duncan's murder, she asks for thick night to come. And don't forget that Duncan's murder does happen at night time too. And she asks for the dunnest, the blackest smokes of hell to come. Later on we hear that the stars' candles are all out, so the idea that God is no longer here, no longer watching, and that the night has been unruly. Later on, similar to all of these references to candles and light, Lady Macbeth, when sleepwalking, says, "Out, out, brief candle." So this idea of a life, a brief life, that they've snuffed and killed this life of Duncan, of the Macduffs, of Banquo. They've out, brief candle to all of those people. Final motif then is that of infertility, which means that you aren't able to have a child. So infertility within the play, remembering that Macbeth and Lady Macbeth don't have a child, it represents this lack of legacy, that you're not going to have this future reputation because you haven't got any children to carry on your name. And also, therefore, the failure of Macbeth's ambition. It doesn't matter what he does. It doesn't matter that he'll be king, because ultimately he will die, and then that line of succession will not stay within the Macbeth family. It can't. He hasn't got a son. He hasn't got a daughter. Now, it's interesting because there are some clues that perhaps Macbeth and Lady Macbeth did have a child who's died. This one's driven Shakespearean scholars are crazy. And in some versions of the films, the Fassbender one that I watched, 2015, I think, we start that version of the film with them burying their child, which is not in the play. But the clue that they might have had a child comes when Lady Macbeth says, "I have given suck and know how tender 'tis to love the babe that milks me." I have given suck, meaning I have breastfed, and I know how tender it is to love the baby that drinks from my breast. Interesting, I have given suck. So some clue there that they might have had children. I mean, she does follow up this line by saying, "I have given suck and know how tender 'tis to love the babe that milked me. But had I so sworn as you had, I would have plucked its boneless gums from my breast and dashed its brains out." Like, I had a lovely baby and it was so tender, but if I promised that I'd kill the king, I would have ripped it from my breast and stabbed its head in. Great mother. Thanks, Lady Macbeth. Another example of the motif of infertility is when Macbeth says, "Upon my head they placed a fruitless crown and put a barren sceptre in my grip." So, okay, he is king, but he's got a fruitless crown, no children, and a barren, another word for infertility, a barren sceptre stick in his grip. "For Banquo's issue have I filed my mind." Banquo's issue meaning his children. So here Macbeth is saying, like, for Banquo's sons, I've destroyed my sanity, I've destroyed, like, my chances of getting into heaven even. So why did he do all of this? Only for Banquo's family to profit from it. And of course, when the witches say to Banquo, "Your children shall be kings, but to Macbeth you shall be king." And this is like that starting point when Macbeth becomes jealous over Banquo's lineage, the fact that his sons will be kings. Don't forget that who's going to be Banquo's descendant? King James I. Students always ask me to give them key quotations to revise from, but I'm not going to make this video any longer. So I'm going to just flash up the key quotations for you guys. If that is something that you would like me to do, then leave me a message in the comments, and if I get enough requests or likes in the comment that tell me to do that, then fine, I'll do it. But right now, no. No. So here are some of our key quotations. Here's my first slide, my second slide. Feel free to pause, screenshot, what have you. And my third slide, and that was my final slide. Okay, so you've got those 3 slides there. Well, thank you so much for joining me for a long revision lesson, and I do hope that that was useful for you guys. If you like this video lesson, please do like the video and subscribe to my YouTube channel. And don't forget that you can find more like this on my website, that's taughtly.co.uk. So there's lots and lots of free resources on there and example essays and so on. If you are interested in doing some tutoring with me, the link is in the description. I do one-to-one, self-formed classes, so you and your classmates form a group, you come to me. And I'm also doing a first language English IGCSE masterclass. More details in the description, but it's live lessons with me and marking with me at a slightly cheaper rate. So hope to see some of you guys there, and hope to see you in my next video lesson. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you next time. Bye.